Hello and welcome to the Joyful Rebels podcast. We have Claire and Donna Thomas here, your mother daughter duo. And this week, we're going to be shining a light on our social media use.
Mm,
So, you may remember several months ago, we had an episode called Time for a Digital Cleanse. And in that episode, we talked about the benefits of, taking a look at your use of social media, of what you're doing online, and then some ways that you might be able to modify or temper that. Today's episode is similar, but different as well. And I think that we're going to view it from another angle that I find really interesting. Um, Tell me if this has ever happened to you. And this is why it's been top of mind for me. Let's say you've got 10 minutes and you go, okay, what am I going to do? I can read a little bit. I can clean up, do some dishes. And then I find myself just scrolling on my phone. And then the 10-minute free
me.
period is over and I have not benefited in any way. I might actually feel worse afterwards,
Mhm.
which we'll get to in a little bit. But it's not great. But what if today we've used social media instead of just this mindless thing, or maybe even just this always negative or always to just scroll and, get out of our minds? What if we view it as a tool and
Mm.
think about how we can really use it to our advantage? So that's kind of the gist of what we'll be talking about today. But it also was top of mind for you, Mom, right? This week, the idea of social media and using it or not being able to use it.
Yeah, it's and I love how there's always this dovetail of talking about, some kinda topic, and it shows up, and sometimes it shows up in smaller ways that are subtle, but are really thought-provoking, and sometimes they're really big ways, and this week was awesome because, I got a new phone. So it was my time to get a new phone, which I have mixed feelings about because I don't know about you, but I get an attachment to my phone. I know it's probably weird and there's some unhealthy things about it, but I'm familiar with it and I know my phone. I also know that when you get a new phone, that there is this switchover time for your apps and for, a lot of times you have to re-log into things and it is not the end of the world. I would say it's inconvenient on some level. And I found that to be the case. So here I was, I have this new phone, super grateful for it. Again, I realize this is a first world problem. This is, nothing that's, threatening my very existence, but it stopped me in my tracks because I had a hard time logging into Facebook. I realized, and because sometimes some of these accounts are really old, so I can't remember like what's my login. I may have stored that somewhere, but I realized for this one that I had an email on it that was from that I no longer use, that I no longer have access to. Now, I'm a grown woman. I can look at the directions on how to change an email, and thanks, Claire, because you walked me through it too. But there's a way to find that information, and I started doing that and making some of the changes, but I stopped myself in my tracks and I thought, wait a minute, if I have a hard time logging in, do I need to have it on my phone?
Mm.
And I wouldn't even have considered that otherwise. Because usually I'll post things that'll go from Instagram to Facebook and they're kind of intertwined. But I thought, this is a thing for me. I am trying to look at how am I using it to represent what's happening in my life. We use it for Joyful Rebels to get information out there and to provide content that's uplifting or thought provoking. So I don't mind being in this space, but for me, I like having guardrails on it. And here I was presented with one I didn't ask for. Now I could have powered through and be like, I'm gonna be able to get it. I can get Facebook on my laptop, no problem. I'm not on my laptop that often. And I need it to communicate with your girls, Claire, because they can do some messaging. That's my reason to be on Facebook. Here's the point. I was really all I needed was a moment to pick my head up to go, do I really want to do that? And what happens if I focus on less apps and just see how that feels where it's a little bit more manageable? Because ultimately, I like being in real time. The less time I spend on social media, I'm reading a little bit more now. I've been inspired by you, Claire. I want to spend more time
Yay.
doing other things. And this was one place that I could gain some time back. And here's what I'm finding so far is that uh, I don't feel as connected to it. I had a couple of days where I was jonesing, and I just have a habit of checking. And I realize that I'm still on Instagram. I can still look through there and get whatever needs met or feel connected to other people. That's really where my heart is when I'm on social media. But you guys, and I don't have it on my phone. I did not take the steps to make sure that I can log in and get it on my phone because I realized I don't need it. So, and I'm not eschewing all social media by any stretch, but I can cut it back and still feel like I can get the parts that make me feel good, as opposed to have a tipping point of too many things to manage, where then I feel like that feels stressful to me. So that brings in it's not just the amount of time, how does it make me feel?
Mm.
So that's when got some research here on a way to look at that, Claire. So tell us more. What does it look like when we look at it from a different perspective?
Yeah, and I wonder how many people listening would feel very similar to how you do, that if presented with the idea of not being able to log in, like it's kind of, oh, that's really frustrating, right? Like, all right, I want to be able to get on, and why? And I love how you said, how does that make you feel? Because again, that's going to be a big driver for us today. So again, you listening, uh, maybe it's time that we analyze social media and how it can be a tool in our lives. And so we're going to talk about 3 steps that we can do to shine a light on our social media use, including this cool type of analysis that, Mom, you're going to get into in a little bit. So
Okay.
the first thing that we're going to do when we want to look at our social media use is determine your goals. So think about how you use social media. And we talk about goal setting all the time, habit tracking, but in terms of how you're using social media, what are the goals? And, Mom, you mentioned connection. So
Mhm,
maybe it's being able to connect with people. I remember when I moved to the Bahamas, it was really important for me to share on Instagram when I was new to that, because I was putting pictures of the kids and we weren't there, or only Ella at the time, but I was putting pictures. So maybe it's
mhm,
it's connection is important to you. Maybe you can look at it categorically, like professionally. Like maybe I want to spend time on social media writing down some blogs, like for my website, and being able to share that to get new clients or customers. Maybe it's personal development. I want to be able to go online and peruse social media to find a course that I want to take, that's actually working towards some of my other goals. Maybe it's development in a way like I want to be able to learn more or challenge my brain. So I'm going to focus, make sure I'm spending time on Wordle or Duolingo, right? So it's
mhm,
maybe taking a look at some of these things you do, but what's your why? What's your why behind it? Maybe it's something subjective, like we talked about connection, but like creativity. So maybe I like to go on Book Talk, like that side of Instagram, and just see what people are reading. Like it gives me ideas then for what I'm reading. And I find some people whose opinions I respect and I tend to agree with. And so that gives me an inspiration then when I'm looking for the next book to download, to read. Um, Maybe I'm utilizing, ooh, I don't know if you heard that. Really loud thunder outside my window. So, okay. Maybe you're utilizing it for things like, I want to find ways to be happy. So for me, sometimes it's going through and looking through my Google Photos makes memories for me. And I'm like, oh, I'm enjoying looking through this. It's sparking these feelings of reminding me of these happy times. Or finally, when you're looking at your goals for social media, maybe you're looking at it through your different roles that you may have.
mhm,
So maybe as a friend, and I know that I do this and friends do this, looking at different online event calendars that might be shared through Facebook or Instagram, to find things that we might like to go to see. Or maybe, it's from a parenting aspect where you're going to look at, oh, I want to read these types of parenting blogs. I want to read these types of recipes. So again, I found this really interesting to, instead of just view it as this endless abyss of social media, like what are my actual distinct goals and whys when I'm going into certain websites or apps? So the first thing that you can do is take a few minutes and determine your goals. The second thing you can do then is to gather data. So we are the scientist minds here, right? And you are too if you're gathering some data on yourself. And when we talked about the digital cleanse episode, we said there are apps you can download, or you can even look in the settings of your phone and it will tell you how much time you spend in each app, which is good information. But here's how we're going to differentiate that today. We're going to say, even if it's for one day, write down, okay, the date, the time, how long I was doing it, what app I was in, why. And here's the kicker: how do I feel
mhm,
in real time? How do I feel on this app, on this website? Because again, we can take a look and objectively see the amount of time we spend in each app, but it's really important, especially when we go into the analysis side of it, to be able to look and see how did that make me feel? And doing things like self monitoring, and we know this from the research, it increases your awareness. And hey,
Mm.
you heard us talk about that on Joyful Rebels before, turning your awareness light on. And when your awareness light is on, that's when you can actually influence and spark changes in your behavior and in your patterns. So you're going to determine your goals, gather some data, and then you're going to analyze. And this is where you're going to look for patterns. And again, focusing on not just necessarily amount of time spent in what apps, but how it makes you feel. And there's a specific way and method that we can use to do some analysis of our own social media data. And we call that, well, it's called the SWOT method. So, Mom, you know
Mm.
more about this than me. You have experience with this. Can you walk us through what that is and how we can use it in terms of looking at our social media use?
Yeah, and I'm so excited that to see the application of this tool in this space, which I never would have put two and two together for this at all. I've used it in the business world. You can use it for it. So professionally, I've used it. So again, for personally, I haven't, but professionally, you would use it if you were either having new business or being in a new area because you gather a bunch of data of what's around you as a business, and or if your business is in trouble, if you're struggling, there's ways to objectively and as an observer just get an idea what's happening. It helps you think clear. So SWOT isn't the SWAT like SWAT team, it's SWOT. So if you're walking or you're just listening, you'll just answer these questions or get an idea. I think we could probably put a link to what this looks like at the, in the notes here.
Yeah.
But SWOT stands for, the S is for strengths. You're looking for strengths, and we'll get into a couple of questions here in a moment. W is weaknesses. So we get a chance to, and I like that language. A strength and a weakness doesn't mean good or bad. It's allowing it to have its own space there. So strengths, weaknesses, and then the O is opportunities. And I love the brainstorming that can come there, the opportunities that are there that help me to think outside of the box. And then we have to address the shadow side of it. The T stands for threats. And wow, that's a big word that's loaded, but a threat can be anything you perceive as a
Mm.
threat. And so then this makes things very personal. And so I love, Claire, how you differentiated between time spent on social media. Like some of it's the sum total. You're gonna go macro on that. Like that's the big okay, but you can be on social media for a small amount of time and have it not feel good. So that's not the only marker. And I like how this digs deeper. So again, we're looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So let's get to it. If you're listening and carrying on a rhythm, if we're talking about strengths, you can ask yourself a couple of questions to dial it in and make it clear to file in how it sits in your brain. And so here's for strengths. You can ask yourself what media and technology use works well. It's not all bad. Like some of it works really well. I like hearing about the event calendar. Like you're getting ready to do something with other people. Like this is one way to gather information. What are some of the benefits that you currently receive? I already said it for me. It was the connection. Like that's the connection or people that are far away as an example. And then what unique resources or strengths do different platforms or devices offer? Like LinkedIn is very different than Instagram. Some days it's not, but many times it is. TikTok is going to be different. The group on there is different than probably Facebook. What are you using it for? So even when you parse it out, that's where I was like, Facebook, you can take a back seat for a little bit. You don't need to be a primary player here. So strengths, ask yourself those questions. Let's get right to the weaknesses. The weaknesses can be like, what are the negative patterns you've discovered? And that could be from the time that you're there. I mean, you're going to fill in the blanks, but I'm guessing if I say negative patterns, you can identify because it happens over and over again, right? Where do your patterns suggest that you are the most vulnerable to negative patterns? Let me say that again. When do your patterns suggest that you're more vulnerable to these negative patterns? I can tell you right now, for me, it's when I'm tired.
Mm.
Boy, I think that's probably where we're the most vulnerable. I also will suggest think about your time first thing in the morning and your time right before you go to bed. We've talked about those being tender times
Hmm.
when we're most vulnerable and open to suggestions. And that could be a time when you may or may not want to be on whatever app or device that you have. You may or may not. If it's something that really nourishes you, maybe that is a time. So again, we give you the menu, you pick out what fits for you, and we trust that the things that are really specific to you will land in your brain and you'll have it when you need it. I do trust that that happens. And then finally, on the weaknesses, um, is the content of value? Has anybody else ever had it where you're watching something? Maybe it's a TMZ. Like, who doesn't like a good TMZ? But at some point, I see a picture of a celeb. I'm like, somebody else died. Is that adding value? Do I want to look at that right now? And I am finding that I limit that a lot more than I ever have. We limit that for our kids, right? Like, you don't need to be getting all of that information in. I'm turning it on myself as a grown woman in the fourth quarter. I'm like, no, I can limit that too because it doesn't make me feel good. I don't need to watch something that is disturbing. And especially if I have it at nighttime,
Mm,
no good for me. That's the 1-2
mm-mm.
punch. Okay, so we have strengths and weaknesses. Now, let's get into the opportunities, which I love that they're limitless. It's how you see what an opportunity is. One question you might ask yourself is, what benefit can I gain by making changes in my patterns? And I just mentioned one, nighttime for me. What benefit? There's an opportunity. If I really look at my day, maybe I have an 8 o'clock turn off where I'm like, I don't need to be looking at that anymore. That also works on the level of putting a screen away to give yourself some time before you go to bed as a PM ritual. Now, it's all becoming clear to me as it's all converging. Like, that is an opportunity. Time of day, state. Are you hungry? Are you tired? Take a look at those. Those are opportunities to link your use or non-use of social media during those times. And then finally, threats. Whew. Say, what behaviors could hamper my goals if I make no changes? Wow. So if I don't change anything, like, what kind of effect can that have? What happens for me? What happens if I keep letting garbage come in? And I'm not talking about scrubbing your social media so that you never hear an opinion that's different than yours. I think there's healthy discourse. I think there's tension in seeing some other things that are different, but to what extent? You get to decide that. And then what threats do your behaviors expose to you? What if I look at that, what if I watch things at night when I'm tired? What does that tell me? And that just tells me that that is a way more important time than I ever put value on. I didn't realize it. I put it in the same category as any other time of the day, kind of like just what I do. Anybody ever have that thought? This is just what I do. I'm thinking now, it's just what I do today. That doesn't mean that I have to continue to do that because we are all about making shifts that don't feel good in this season today. But if my awareness light is not on, I don't see it, which has been me in the past. It's been me. So I've got strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I'm finding a pattern as I continue to play with this. I've got my 24 hours to really digest and allow things to settle in. But here's the thing about this SWOT analysis. Again, as it's used in business, it's to gather information for something that's existing or something that's new. How I'm looking at it from a personal perspective is that it allows me to be curious. Like, I can look at it as it's not all in my head, which seems personal. Now I can look at it and go, "Oh, there's a structure." I'm getting a little bit of distance, which not only makes me curious, but the duo to that is I'm an observer. I can see
Mhm.
on paper. I can see as I'm writing it in my notes, like, wow, it makes sense. I have more drive behind making a decision because it seems obvious. And then when was the last time you made a decision where you're like, kind of that, of course I'm going to do that when I couldn't see it before. So it provided clarity where I can be curious, look at things as an observer, and make the changes necessary so that I don't put myself under undue stress for no reason because it doesn't make me feel good. And I don't need to fatigue myself out that way because I'm treating myself better.
Mm, I like that. I love how you talked about tender times again, because the second that you said that, that just hit me like, yeah, that's been one of the, if you were to ask me one of the biggest take homes from doing this podcast, and I should have mentioned it in our recap episode a couple weeks ago, but it was thinking about those tender times because and talking about bedtime routine, PM rituals, all those things. Because I think if you listening go through and do this analysis, I'm wondering how many people would agree that what they're doing right before bed is not benefiting them. And that was something that stuck out for me. And I was able to shift nighttime doom scrolling to reading. So not only does my mind and my mental health feel better before bedtime, but I'm also reading more. And if you've been following along, you know that I've been harping about that, how my reading journey. And
I'm
mom,
reading more.
I'm so proud of you to hear that. I love that. I'm like, I have another friend too who's like, look how many books I've read now. So this is great. So if you're listening and you're reading more, heck yeah. And if you want to get into reading, I support you.
Yeah.
But anyways, it's kind of it hits all these checks all these different boxes. So I love how you said, Mom, you're going to be an observer. It allows you to be a little bit more objective, to put some space on it. And when you write something down, you're bringing in more of that executive functioning. It's not
Mm.
as emotional once you write it down on paper. So, again, even if you have apps and you can look at time spent in them, take one day. If you're listening, take one day, write down your social media use and check out how you feel as you're doing it, because you can observe, you can get curious about it. And once your awareness light is on, hey, if something doesn't feel good, you have the power to shift it. So, to recap one more time, really quickly here, you're going to determine what your goals are for social media, whether it's professional, personal, how you want it to make you feel, how it can help out in different roles in your life. Then you're going to gather that data. Like we just said, one day, one piece of paper, write down the time that you're spending in different apps, what you're doing in there, and how you feel afterwards. Then you're going to do this analysis, this SWOT, your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You're going to be able to look at this objectively and with curiosity and with love and grace and compassion to yourselves as we get this information. I'm excited. I'm doing it. Mom, I know that you've done this work too.
Yeah.
And again, I want to end one more time. If something doesn't feel good, we have the power to shift it.
Yep.
So until next time, Rebels.